John back here on a good Saturday afternoon, out here trying to get some good images taken today. So what I'd like to do is talk you through on how to use a 10 stop. I might even combine my 10 stop and 6 stop into a little bit souped up super stopper for Lee, because their super stopper is typically only 15 stops. Now, I've never done it before, so I might mess it up. It might not even turn out correctly, but I'm sure it should be okay by stacking the two filters on top of each other to create essentially 16 stops. So I'm going to do that, try to figure out how much time I'm going to need to get that exposure, and I'm going to try to walk you through the entire process of what we need to do to get this long exposure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get things moving. I'm going to go ahead and get the camera and the kit set up so we can get things going. As soon as I get everything ready, I'll sit there and I'll talk through everything for you. Okay, so I've got the camera set up and I'm ready to start the process of getting this long exposure. I went ahead and connected my cable release so I can have that as a fail-safe to make sure that I've got no camera movement or camera shake when I do this. I can completely make sure that I'm away from it. I'm also going to make sure that it's on a 2-second timer. That way, no matter what, I'm standing around a bunch of rocks. So if I step on something and move the tripod, it just gives me that extra couple of seconds. So it doesn't hurt to do it. It's not probably necessary right now in this situation, but it never does hurt to have that 2-second timer on there. The next thing I want to do is I want to try to figure out what aperture I want to use to get this image. I know that with my 16 to 35 millimeter Nikon lens that it's the sharpest at around f8. Anywhere from f8 to 11, it's going to be super sharp, and I like it at f8 most of the time. So I'm going to go ahead and set it. I'm in manual mode. I don't know how to shoot in any other way, so typically I shoot in manual mode. It's okay if you shoot in aperture mode. Maybe I'll do a complete video on how to shoot completely in aperture modes for those of you that are still kind of like shy about moving into manual mode. But we'll do that in another video. But today I just want to talk about getting this long exposure. So I'm going to use f8 as my aperture. I'm going to set my ISO to its lowest point, and for the D750 that is ISO 100. And I'm going to make sure that my histogram is pulled up on my live view, and I'll show you here in a second, but I want to make sure that my histogram has got most of the information towards the center of it. Okay, so if you can see on the back of my camera, like I was talking about, I'll show you the settings that I've got right now as is. Again, you can see right here it's got f8 as my aperture. I've got my ISO set to 100. Right now I'm getting a 1/200th of a second shutter speed for this image, and if you can see the histogram, it's really good. It's really good right now. Most of the information, I do have some really bright highlights and some very dark shadows, so that's why you're going to see that spike right there on the right hand side, but it's still in a good location to where it's not going to have anything blown out in the highlights, and it looks like I've still got a lot of detail in my shadows. I'm not too worried about exactly right down here at the bottom of the frame that's right in front of the camera, but it does look like my histogram is decent. So if you see, when you mess with your exposure, you can see that everything's stacked up on the right. It's going to be completely underexposed. You can tell that by your histogram. Say for instance, if I went to the other side, if I come way over here, you can start to see in live view that in my histogram I've got these spikes all the way on the right hand side of the histogram, and you don't want that. So you want to make sure that somewhere that you have your histogram in the center as much as possible. And like I said, for this image there is going to be some high contrast. That's why you do have that one high spike on the right hand side, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. I'll probably bring it down just a little bit just to make sure that I have all the good detail in the sky when I get this going. So that's the initial look for the camera right now without any filters on. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, and I'm going to start adding some filters and start to see what the histogram does as I start to add filters. So I'll be right back. So one of the first things I'll do obviously is put on the Lee filter holder, and since I've already got my circular polarizer mounted to it, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that on there. So that'll be the first thing that I look at, is the polarization of the image. And for this image, what I'm thinking about with the polarizer is, because I've got good side lighting, I should be able to just draw back a lot of that saturation from the sky with my polarizer and knock off any glare that I have at all on this water that's in my foreground. So I've got the polarizer adjusted to where it's bringing out some really good definition and saturation in the sky and on the bridge itself. As I turned it, you could really see the difference as you made its adjustments. It did tweak the histogram a little bit, but nothing too out of whack. So I've still got a very good exposed image. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and start dropping in the two neutral density filters. The first one I'm going to put in there is going to be the 6-stop, the little stopper. And right now, before I put any filters in there, my shutter speed is 1/60th of a second. So we got to remember that, because once I get these filters in there, the sensor's not going to be able to see anything. So it's not going to be able to give me a proper exposure. I'm going to have to switch it to bulb mode and time it with a timer to get this properly exposed. So I'm going to go ahead and get this other filter put in there. Give me a second. So I've got both filters in there, the 6-stop filter and the 10-stop filter, essentially making it a 16-stop neutral density filter. The sun is getting a little bit low in the sky, so I've got to really hurry up and try to get this long exposure done. I am going to hang around though afterwards, after the sun goes down, to see if the color changes in the sky any, so I can get a decent shot of this without any filters. But let's get this one done first. So before I put the filters in there, I said we got to remember the shutter speed. The shutter speed was 1/60th of a second. Now, Lee does make a 15-stop filter. So on their app, it gives you the adjustments and the shutter speeds and the time that you need to leave your shutter open for a 15-stop filter. Now, I don't have a 15-stop on there, I've got a 16. So what I might do is just add about maybe a minute to whatever time it tells me on this app to use for a 15-stop filter. And at 1/60th of a second, it says 8 minutes. It's going to be an 8-minute exposure to get this image done with these two filters on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it run for a minimum of 9 minutes and see what it gives. So I think I'm ready. It's focused where it needs to be focused. It's on f8, ISO 100, 16 stops worth of neutral density filters, a polarizer, and 9 minutes of waiting. I'll be back in a minute, or actually 9 minutes. All right, so the image just got done cooking. About 9.5 minutes, I think it was, while the image was there. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a look at it. One of the things you want to do here in the field, because you know, a 9.5 minute exposure, you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of these exposures. So obviously you wanted to do what we did before and try to get everything right before we take the image. But again, let's go ahead and look at it. We'll zoom in, kind of move around the image, see if there's any imperfections on the image, and I don't see any. It seems to be good. Looks like it's going to turn out to be a really good image. I like the way it looks in camera. So I figured this today will do something a little different. Instead of me just kind of like showing you the image on the screen, let's go back to the house. I'll upload it into Lightroom and we'll walk through the image together and make some adjustments. So next time you see me, we'll be at the house ready to go. Talk to you in a little while. Okay, welcome back everybody. We're here in Lightroom. Let's go ahead and tackle this image and start getting it processed. Alright, so one of the first things I'd like to do is look at it and see where exactly and how I'd like to have this image cropped. And just looking at it real quick, I think that it's going to best be served as a panoramic crop just because of the elongation of the bridge itself going across the screen. So let's go ahead and work on that. I'm going to open up the crop tool. I'm going to come down here, eliminate some of the bottom because I see that's where some of it I could probably get rid of is at initially. Let's not forget to unlock it. Come back down here. I'm going to drag it back up. Let's see, let's say right about there. And I'm going to come up to the top of the image and I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to use the bottom rule of thirds grid line that you see there, and I'm going to bring it down just to where the water's edge is on that line. And I can also see with that straight line that the horizon is not straight at the water line, so I'm going to use it to straighten it. That looks like a good beginning right there for the image, so that looks like the crop I'll use. That's typically how I do about my image first, is find the crop that I'd like, put it in that, and then I'll go from there. The next thing I'll do is I'll come all the way down to the bottom in the tools, and I'll enable profile corrections for my lens. It'll automatically recognize that I use the 16 to 35 from Nikon and adjust it accordingly. Let's go back up to the top, and this is where I initially will look at the image and determine whether or not I want it to be a black and white or a colored image. I actually had black and white already selected, sorry. But yeah, so this is what the image right here looked like in RAW with color. It's kind of got a good blue tint to it. There wasn't a lot of color in the sky, so everything kind of blends together. So that's why it kind of led me to think that this would be a great black and white image. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and hit the black and white button, and it'll already start me off on a good starting point for a black and white image. Now we still have a little bit of work to do with it to make it a good image. You can see the histogram. Nothing was crushed here on the black, so I have quite a bit of room still left in the highlights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the exposure up to bring some of those whites in so I can start working this black and white image. Probably about right to there. Bring the histogram right up into the middle. Alright, then I'm going to move right down to the contrast. I'm probably going to add about 25, a value of 25 to the contrast. And yeah, that looks really good. It just brings out, if you can see what that's doing, it's just bringing back some of the blacks into the image, making it a little bit more contrasty for a nice black and white. I'm going to bring the highlights down quite a bit because I think this area here is where I'm going to gain some definition in my highlights, because I have a lot of streaks in the clouds from the long exposure. So let's go ahead and bring that down. And yeah, see, I start to see some more definition of those streaks in the sky, and that's kind of like what I want to highlight because of a long exposure like we did, almost 10 minutes in fact. For the shadows, I don't see that I'm going to raise those too much because all that's going to do is affect these areas down in here, and that kind of would probably take away from the contrast of the image, and I don't really need to do that. I might just bring it up to maybe 15, and that's about it. Moving down, I'll go straight to the whites. Again, it's a black and white image, so I want to contrast the two colors, the blacks and the whites. I'm going to bring the whites up to about 30, the blacks down. You're going to see up here, when I start to bring the blacks down, I'm going to start to crush the blacks and lose the data. And I can tell you that it's probably going to be right down in this area. So I'm going to hit the Option key and use the slider, and sure enough, it's those dark areas of the image that I would be losing the data. So I don't really want to do that. I want to bring it right down to where it's at, bring it back a little bit, and that should be good. So -10 on the blacks, and then I'm going to add a little bit of clarity to the image, maybe 25 again. If you watch, it's starting to lose some of the blacks up here. Again, when you do that in clarity, you can see if you put that there and highlight it, you'll see some of the area. So I'll just go back up to the blacks, drag it to the right until it no longer does that, and that should be good. Moving down, I'm going to go straight to the sharpening. Now, looking back on the image and looking at it now, I can see that we did have some heavy wind during the 9 to 10 minute exposure that we did, so there was probably a little bit of camera movement, so it's a soft image up here a little bit on top of the bridge pylons. It's not completely an unusable image, but it does take away from it a little bit. So I'm going to bring the sharpening up to about 50, just to try to it's not going to completely do anything for the softness, but it's just going to make the bridge and some of the metallic lines on it a little bit more sharp. I'm going to go ahead and highlight, hit my Option key again, grab the masking tool slider, and I'm going to start dragging it to the right. It's going to first and foremost show all the hot spots from the sensor, the heat spots from the sensor, but it's also going to show you all the white areas on the image. When this is highlighted and you're doing sharpening, those are the only areas of the image that are going to be sharpened. So yeah, I want to make sure that I'm not sharpening the areas outside of those, just the lines on the bridge itself. But yeah, those hot spots on that sensor from that almost 10-minute exposure, they're almost inevitable at that point. But you can take some of that away by adding some luminance noise reduction there, and also in the color. Even though it's a black and white image, you can still do some noise reduction in the color band to get some of that out. And once I did that, a lot of those spots went away to the naked eye. So yeah, it's not so bad. And I'm going to move down and see what doing just a little bit of dehaze will do to the image. It should just bring back some definition. And they can make it, like I said, pop a little bit more between the blacks and whites, and that's about it. I'm going to probably do 5 on the dehaze. But other than that, the image is starting to look really good as is. I'm going to probably bring the exposure up just a little bit more, about to 95 on the plus side on that exposure compensation. So that looks really good right there. I think that that's going to be the final product for our black and white image. A little 5-minute, looks like, edit. If you can see the image on the left and then the image on the right. Not much was done to it, just turned it into a nice elegant black and white, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and export this file, upload it into the video, finish editing it, and I should upload that real soon. And you'll see the final image at the end of the video, which should be right about now.